This special meeting of the Norwood City Council is hereby called to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in these council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Stevens.
Present.
Mrs. Hamilton.
Present.
Mr. Sanker. Mr. Brady.
Here.
I did hear from Mr. Sanker he was going to be just a little bit late, but he will be here shortly, I'm assuming. And we have no request to address council on agenda items, so we'll move on to the business of this meeting, and that is to consider an ordinance approving amended detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to move that we have all three readings of the ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall, are you planning on going through the changes or anything?
Yes, I will go through them, I guess, if you'd like, after we do the readings.
Okay, thank you. So the motion on the floor is to suspend the rules. Is there any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hamilton.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Ordinance approving amended detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving amended detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving amended detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the ordinance be passed.
Seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. So we are considering, I guess, this ordinance today to approve the amended version of the financial recovery plan. It's similar to the version that we talked about at the committee of the whole meeting 2 weeks ago. There have been some changes, so I will go through some of those changes now. So on the first page of the actual, I guess, general fund forecast, under revenues, the Finance Committee met on Thursday, and we took under advisement the recommendation from the mayor and the president of council regarding the cable TV television dollars that we're getting from Cincinnati Bell. And it's the intent of it was the intent of the city to give the cable television dollars, send them to Pace Telecommunications to fund the TV studio and fund all of the great work that they do. So Finance Committee agreed with the mayor's recommendation on that, and we decided and we have asked that those future dollars go to Pace. And it was only a year that really there were a significant amount of dollars that were coming into the general fund. It was about a little bit over $50,000. So in the forecast in the future, we have taken out those, it's like $58,000 from 2018, 19, 20, 21, 2022, and they won't be in the plan at all because they'll go into a separate fund that will go then be sent to Pace. So the Finance Committee report will be read tomorrow to talk about that more. Also included in here is the income tax. From 2019 to 2020, it wasn't increased, and then which affected then the years from 2021 to 2022. So those are raised as well. That adds a little bit more income to
Mr. Bonsall.
The projections.
I'm sorry, there's a question by Ms. Stevenson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a point of clarity, it's the fees, licenses, and permits revenue line that was decreased by the $58,000?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So the income taxes are going to be showing up higher than they were in the previous version of the plan. The next portion is under the police crime control. The next change, it's under crime control. So for here, the materials and supplies line was reduced from $133,400 to $110,000 for 2018. 2019 and beyond were kept constant. The Finance Committee talked about changing the contractual services key for 2018 through 2022. And after talking with the Auditor of State representatives, they truly felt it was prudent to not reduce it and to leave it the same. So we thought there could be some savings there, but instead we're just going to leave it the same for now because there's a few expenses that weren't accounted for when the police chief submitted his budget originally. So those will stay the same, even though Finance Committee did talk about on Thursday changing them. Those are the same here for the moment. Under capital outlay, there's an $8,300 expenditure that wasn't there in the version that we talked about 2 weeks ago. So the police department has found 2 police cruisers that they're able to purchase. They're 2011. They've been reviewed by the city garage, and they have about, I think, 60,000 miles on them. And so they can get both of them for $8,300, and that includes the decals and includes the things that they need to make it work. And normally a police cruiser is about $50,000 if we buy it new. So even if we get 50,000 miles out of each of these, and even if we have to maybe put a little work into it, if something breaks down, it's still going to be a great value per mile that the city's getting out of that. And it's going to help kind of bridge that gap between not having any additional police cruisers this year. So that's in there. It's just a one-time expense. And then, so that will just affect then, and then the debt service. So if we go 3 more pages in, right under the general government expenditures, there's a debt service. And unfortunately, they're not numbered, so it'll be it's the last page before we go into the actual recovery plan items. So it's, let's see here. You'll see health environmental at the very top of that page if you're to make sure. Okay, yeah. So under debt service, when the Auditor of State did their estimate, they did not realize that we have no more debt service payments starting in 2022. So we will have paid off all of our bonds at that point. So they were able to take that off, and that adds another. Let's see here.
$297,000.
Exactly, yes. Almost $300,000 to our bottom line there at the ending. So everything, and then on the recovery plan items page, that stays the same. So for the general fund, it shows us by the end of 2022, it's a positive $758,000 after all the plan items are considered. Does anybody have any questions about the general fund or any of the items that are in there? Okay.
And worth noting that in 2020, we're in the positive
Yes, and that's
as it stands
yes,
now.
that's a very big deal. So on the Fund 2, the Street Construction and Repair Fund, this one is pretty much the same. There were a few so the big note here, and Eric Thompson reached out to me today about this once we sent out the plan. But we talked about potentially putting like a capital outlay line in this plan to show that we're going to actually be spending money on our streets, like starting in, whatever year that we would have started it then. And there was some miscommunication there, and so that didn't get added to the plan. And also, it doesn't really hurt anything because we don't have a plan to spend the funds. So really, if we don't put it in here, then these funds can't be spent, which is a good thing. I mean, until we have a solid plan of what we're going to do with them. And my goal of these, this extra by the end of 2022, the $2.6 million for just dedicated to streets. My goal is to use, as much of that as possible as matching grants, or as a match to, an 80-20 type of grants that are out there. So, a lot of grants that we get right now, the matches that we get from the community development block grants, they can only be used in areas of the city that are, I don't know what the right term is, distressed, or as, a lower
Low to moderate income.
Yeah, low to moderate income. Thank you.
Low to low moderate income.
Yeah, low to low, exactly, yes. And so having this extra money that we can use as a match, because we can't use the block grants on matches for most of the city, is going to be helpful. So long story short about that, she said, when I talked to April about this today, she very much said there's no need to worry. We're going to have to change the plan anyways, likely later on this year. And that by that point, either our streets committee or we can figure out a way to kind of have a plan going forward, what we want to do with it. But there's no rush, and she said that she'll easily be able to let the Financial Recovery Commission know, that this is no concern and this is actually a positive, because it's better not to show that we're spending the money if we don't have the exact plan together yet of how we're going to spend it.
And we will be required, April and Anna Mary are going to be working on, in the future, a capital expenditure plan as well, so I'm sure the streets can be included in that. So that's one of the requirements, because we have a lot of pent-up demand for equipment and streets and things, so.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So, and then the highway fund pretty much looks about the same as it did in the original plan. So, that being said, there are some changes, but it's not a lot. Most of it is what we looked at 2 weeks ago.
Questions? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. Just a comment in terms of wanting to use those street funds for a match. Can we make sure that the previous grant opportunities we've identified, they're aware of those timelines? So as they're putting together the capital plan, they'll know what amounts and when we might want to be leveraging?
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, so it sounds like your question or comment is that you would like to make sure that when we're looking at these grants or when we're looking at the capital improvements plan, that we're talking to each other between the two processes to make sure that we know when we expect to outlay expenditures.
Yeah, I know we talked about spending money over time, and I just want to make sure we're hitting the right timelines to do as much leveraging as possible. I'm not making the assumption they know what grants we might want to apply for, so I don't want us to be budgeting, maybe $100,000 when really we just need $25,000 more budgeted that year in order to make a match where we can actually do more work.
That's a great point. So I'll make sure that we stay in communication and as we work on that plan and make sure that those things happen.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other comments or questions? Mayor?
Nope.
Nothing to say. All right.
No, I mean, basically, it's a plan, and it's going to change, and just like numbers in it, you can't put numbers in that runs us further into debt. So basically, the numbers were put in to make sure that we stay along the plan, so that we don't run deeper into debt. And that's basically what it amounts to. Will it change? Of course it'll change. It'll change probably 2 or 3 times before it's all over with. But the goal is to set the plan out where we're not planning to go further into debt. The idea is that, if the treasurer, rightfully so, as in the past, always been conservative on predicting income. And that's apparently what's happened now. Do I think it'll stay that way? I hope not. But I can assure you, if he would produce or predict higher income, there will be somebody knocking on your door wanting to spend it. So if you just plan it out level, then we know. And then, just like Mr. Bonsall said, and then working with Don and everything, you plan just so your finances match the plan, or you're not going deeper into debt. Now, there are some areas that we'll be looking at down the road. Of course there is. Some things that haven't, been determined yet. i.e. the retirees' health care plan, 911. So all those things can come into play, and they're yet to come. That's why it's, when people say, well, you didn't follow this, well, of course not. It's a guideline to satisfy the state and our financial obligations. I guess that's as simple as I can put it.
That's a good point.
And to your point, Mayor, in the financial recovery plan, there are assumptions, and those are duly noted. The potential savings with the passage of different retirees' health care plan and or contracts, things that we can't do, we can't put into the plan until if they come to fruition. So hopefully the outlook will be even better than we have here, but a lot of work gone into this, and thank you, Mr. Bonsall, you've led the charge, and so I think it's probably from my point of view, was probably a more realistic plan this year than probably last year, as we were just getting into the fiscal emergency and the plan. So this was certainly looked into at greater depth, and I appreciate everybody's multiple meetings where you've come and we've reviewed this and tried to share as much information as possible so you could make an informed decision tonight. So,
if I may, on this one page, right at the top, it kind of serves says it all. So when people ask you, it reads, "It also serves as a master plan by which all future appropriations must comply and directs the correction of all issues in financial recovery. The financial plan may be amended in the same manner as next." So basically, it's telling us that, and it's easy to communicate this, that this plan has to show a decrease in our debt. And that's as simple as I can put it. It's kind of self-explanatory.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. So I was recalling some of our discussions about the assumptions you were just mentioning. At one point in time, we talked about some staffing levels and how that could help even out cost. I had a conversation with a resident earlier today, and they were asking, once we make some assumptions put into the plan, obviously we know it's a living document. They were kind of asking, how do we know, or what kind of safeguards are in place to stay within the plan at the staffing levels and or just within administration? So I know we're going to make more adjustments over the years, even later this year, but I'm just wondering, can we have a little more conversation around what's that next step? Do we, as council, have a checkpoint other than allocations for just making sure if we say this is what we're intending, that we're staying there? So a specific example, if we were to make an adjustment to a department, I know we don't budget for overtime, but how do we keep an eye on, is that overtime need going beyond the plan?
Do you want to answer? You want me to?
Yeah, it's a lot of times you can set a budget number where I have a problem and some other people is when you have scheduled overtime. That can arise sometimes due to shortages or whatever, but that's why we pay chiefs money to make sure to reduce that, and they watch it constantly. You can budget for overtime, but and it's a guess. Like if we say Public Works, all 6 of you, however many we've got down here, no overtime. Well, we could have 7 snows.
Okay.
You can have floods. So there's going to be that fluctuation of you don't know what can happen. And so the chiefs and everybody else looks at reducing the overtime, and above all, scheduled. But on the other hand, you can have fires, you can have any number of things that will increase the overtime. So it's a guess. If you look at historic information, how much overtime was there last year? What time of the year was it? If it's summertime, if it's wintertime, you can go back and look at the historic information and figure on just about where you could get hit with overtime. That's what we have chiefs for. Hold them accountable.
And also, as noted by the mayor, our appropriations have to match our financial recovery plan. So if there aren't sufficient appropriations, the finance committee meets every month with the auditor's office, and they review the reports that are sent to us. And so we're going to get a handle on that, I think, pretty quickly and the financial advisory committee also looks at that. If we're 30 or 40% into the year and somebody spent 70% of their money, that's like a red flag. Something needs to be done. And so those kinds of reports are reviewed by the Financial Planning and Supervision Commission, and I'm sure by the department heads, those things are sent out.
Thank you.
Can I give you just one more example? For example, earlier this year, we have, before we had to do paramedic unit, we had a couple of paramedic units break down. And there was no, where are we going to get the money? Fix it. The individual in charge of the equipment over there says, I hear my paramedics are done. Then fix it. Just get it done. We'll take the heat for it. We've had conversations with the state, the auditor's office, and everything else. If you've got a piece of equipment like that, you need to get it fixed. Same way they had to lease one because the equipment was so bad that we couldn't keep them running fast enough. They were just absolutely beat. But there was no choice. So whatever it costs to fix, if it takes $15,000, spend it. We got to have it. It's situations like that can pop up in a moment's notice. And council's not around, I'm not around, nobody's around except the individuals having to utilize that equipment. They're the ones that have to deal with it. So we've got to open the door where they can.
Any other questions, comments? The motion on the floor is to pass the ordinance. and thereby adopting the financial plan. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We do have one absent member. Mr. Clark,
Move to excuse the absent member.
seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Mr. Bonso,
I move that we adjourn.
seconded by Ms. Hanahan. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.